Hi, this is Christine Dugan-Ihm with my signature assignment, Bullying as an Equity Challenge, a comparative case study of the US, Ireland, and South Korea. So welcome and thank you for joining me. Today, I will be sharing findings from my comparative case study on school bullying as an equity challenge. This study synthesizes UNESCO, OECD, and other findings to illustrate how bullying is both a global and localized equity challenge. By comparing these three very different systems, we see how policy frameworks interact with culture to shape student outcomes. How do they affect student outcomes? We'll explore how the US, Ireland, and South Korea define bullying and respond to it, what works, and where the gaps remain. The American Psychological Association defines bullying as persistent physical or verbal aggression, including cyberbullying, targeting those at a disadvantage. Globally, over 30% of students report being bullied. That was UNESCO 2019. It's staggering amounts, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was underreported. Marginalized students, such as gay and lesbian students, students with disabilities, immigrants, and gifted learners, face disproportionately higher victimization rates. And these citations are all on the pages. If they're not, I will list them on the slides, excuse me. This is not just a behavioral issue. It is an equity challenge that undermines safety, learning, and belonging. Bullying not only reinforces existing social hierarchies, but it also widens academic and mental health gaps. When left unaddressed, it limits access to safe and inclusive learning environments, particularly for historically marginalized groups. The first nation that we're going to examine in a little more detail is the United States. The United States has a decentralized system. The anti-bullying laws vary by state. Strengths of the United States system are a more advanced social emotional learning component that's integrated into the curriculum, trauma-informed policies, and restorative justice practices. They have shown some successes. The limitations of the United States system are that enforcement is inconsistent. Not just, excuse me, enforcement, but also the policies are inconsistent because it is run on a state-by-state basis. And underfunded districts often cannot sustain training or any other kinds of programs. So the implications of that, between 52 and 60% of marginalized students, particularly gay and lesbian students, report that they feel unsafe at school and have been bullied. These inequities reveal that despite the strong frameworks in the United States, these frameworks alone are obviously insufficient without consistency, adequate funding, and accountability. The next country that we're going to be addressing is Ireland. Ireland has a centralized education system. They have national anti-bullying policies and procedures. Some of the strengths of the Irish system are that they have mandatory reporting, which we do not have nationally in the United States, and we don't have nationalized or localized mandatory reporting of bullying statistics in the United States at all. They have a program called FUSE, F-U-S-E, which promotes increasing and talking about students' personal agency and changing the culture. And again, this is a nationalized policy. And well-being is now being prioritized in the curriculum. So those are some of Ireland's national strengths. Limitations of Ireland's system is that the bullying rates, despite this work, remain near global averages. And gifted and gay and lesbian students are disproportionately targeted. So the implications of Ireland's system, implications of their system being centralized, is that there are certain areas in Ireland, very rural areas, very religious areas, where the implementation does not happen with fidelity. Um, and evolving cultural diversity in Ireland is an ongoing challenge. The reference for that is McGuckin and Lewis 2016. That is not up on the page. The third nation that we're going to look at is South Korea. South Korea also has a centralized system like Ireland. They have a national school system. They have a new law, a rigorous new law called the School Violence Prevention Act, which is also centralized. So the strengths of South Korea's system is that they have a strong legal framework. This School Violence Prevention Act, and there are other child protection acts that are national in Korea, very strong laws. And they are also implementing, so they also do mandatory reporting, and they are working on their social emotional learning through a program based, an international program, OECD program called Youth Aware of Mental Health. And they're implementing that, and that has shown some successes around the world as well. So improving on social emotional learning. However, the limitations in Korea is that bullying takes place online. Bullying takes place verbally. It takes place as social stigma and social ostracization. So it is there are not as many physical acts of violence, physical aggression that can be documented. So that's a limitation to Korea's system. Um, Lesbian and gay youth and North Korean refugee students also face particularly heavy discrimination in Korea. And so the implications of this in Korea, there is a strong cultural stigma against any kind of mental health issues or reporting. The social structure in Korea is very rigid, and it discourages anyone from reporting any problems that they may be having. Reporting problems in Korea will result in further stigmatization. So even with those legal mandates, the strong legal mandates that there are in Korea, the cultural stigmas silence victims, and there are many recent media accounts and um, data from OECD regarding suicides. The suicide rates are higher in South Korea than in many other nations, which is very sad. So let's talk about a comparison, just a little clear comparison here. Um, I talked about it in detail in the slides, but just to clarify it here, um, each country's policy illustrates the tension between the structures, their frameworks, and the lived experience of students in the nations. Laws and programs exist in all of the nations that I've covered, but outcomes of these laws and programs really hinge upon implementation of the programs and also the cultural responsiveness, the climate, the cultural climate in schools in these countries. Um, so the equity challenge here is less about whether policies exist to prevent or address bullying, and more about whether these programs and policies reach the students that are targeted, and support them and support the students that are most marginalized. And change the way that things are in these countries. So a common thread is that, of course, marginalized students remain the most at risk. So some cross-cultural lessons that can be divined from all of this data. Evidence confirms that cyberbullying is a rapidly escalating global phenomenon, it requires multi-level solutions such as governmental, school district, community-based solutions. And studies emphasize that data transparency, the levers for accountability and change. So here we just briefly marginalize students. Cyberbullying is growing. A positive school climate and social emotional learning programs reduce bullying. That is evidence-based. Being having intersectionality, overlapping identities, vulnerable identities, being, for example, a gay or lesbian student who is also a refugee, increases student vulnerability. And centralized data collection improves accountability. All of these things are very important. Um, let's see here, that's slide 6. And here we go, slide 7. Implications for practice. Based on the lessons that I've just highlighted, uh, schools should do the following: expand professional development to include trauma-informed, anti-racist, and sexual orientation, sensitivity, all kinds of cultural sensitivity training, very inclusive practices. So improve professional development. Integrate mental health and suicide prevention into anti-bullying frameworks. Center student voice in program design. This is very interesting to me that it's shown to be evidence-based to help with bullying as well, because this is something that an idea that I encountered where I implement in my classroom, not related to bullying, but related to setting class rules. So when students help to draft the rules in the classroom, students tend to adhere more to the rules because they have ownership. They helped to create them. They're their rules as well. They're not just the teacher's rules. And so I find that really interesting that they find data-based evidence that this helps to prevent bullying, to have students involved in the design of the programs. And so implementing a centralized and disaggregated data system, meaning that all of the data points are broken down into discrete points so that the societies can look at trends, see where it's happening, to whom it's happening, the frequency of it happening, and hopefully to track those inequities, discover them, and to address them, hopefully. So embedding social emotional learning and well-being frameworks into daily school practice builds resilience and it reduces aggression. And collaborating with health services also can help to address and mitigate any mental health risks that are associated with chronic bullying. So having more of a community approach as well. So some recommendations. Research shows that students feel safer when teachers receive sustained training and when curricula explicitly addresses equity and bullying. So that's Omore talking about the curriculum. Embedding anti-bullying narratives in literature, history, social studies, in multidisciplinary areas, embedding the anti-bullying narratives is a recommendation put forth by Omore. And educators on professional development, annual and evidence-based training on social emotional learning, cultural responsiveness and interventions, community engagement, partnerships with mental health providers, advocacy groups, cultural organizations. We want to involve the community, and policy advocacy, standardize enforcement, and fund centralized incident databases, prioritize collecting data, mandatory reporting, and analyzing the data to see what's happening and where. We can't address it if we don't know what's happening. So kind of a conclusion and a call to action. Concluding everything, sort of wrapping up my ideas, is that bullying is a systemic equity issue. It is not a behavioral issue. US, Ireland, and Korea each offer strengths, each have programs that are good, but they have limitations, and not one of them has bridged the gap between policy and implementation, between the frameworks of anti-bullying, programs and the lived experiences of students. Moving forward requires we adopt views that are more inclusive of intersectionality, creating inclusive climates, and youth-centered policymaking, student voices. And then I really hope the call to action is we really do need to build safe, equitable schools for every learner. Transformation from uh, policy to lived experience, transformation of culture. The comparative evidence, the comparative evidence shows that no single model is a sufficient model. But if we share these lessons, if we integrate these lessons, perhaps we can inform a more inclusive, culturally responsive system, worldwide systems. Global equity lens, looking at all of this data helps us move practice in our nations beyond just compliance-based work to ensuring that culture shifts, that every student's dignity and safety are preserved. Thank you very much. And I really do truly hope that we can make schools more safe, equitable spaces for every learner. This was a very interesting project and also very saddening to learn about what's happening globally. And I hope that we can take some of these lessons and synthesize some of the wisdom that globally some of the nations have made strides in achieving. Thank you very much. This was a good project for me. I hope that we can make schools more safe, equitable spaces for every learner, synthesizing some of this wisdom that we've garnered from around the world and putting into practice to actually make change the culture, change the lived experience for our students. Thank you very much. And I'll show you my references now. Thank you.